Alright, ladies and gentlemen, it's been quite a while since I did one of these for Genshin. The last time we did a tier list was just before Natlan released back in version 4.8, I believe. And considering how many new units we've gotten, good support, especially good DPS, I thought what better time than to rank some of the best DPS in the game. Now, to clarify, we are only looking here at C0R0, and although we will be going for mostly best in slot teams, if a team is insanely expensive, for example, like Zhao's best in slot team, then, we can assume you have Farina, who's a popular support, maybe Shenyan, who's a niche support, but then maybe you don't have C6 Farazan, maybe like a C2 Farazan, so maybe like 80 to 90% team investment we'll be considering if they need really expensive teams, but if not, then we'll just take the best team just to make this slightly more relatable. Now, how are we ranking this? Well, basically, it is kind of a meta tier list. It is, how strong are these units, and also how worth are they to pull. I feel like if they're too expensive, maybe that will bump them down slightly on the tier list, but I don't want that to take too much of an effect. It is mostly how strong and how useful they are in the current meta. And yeah, with that being said, let's just get started. And also, like I said, I did do a couple of these. I did one of these a couple months ago. Maybe I've flashed it on screen already, so you can see just how what I thought back then, and maybe at the end we'll compare a little bit, but not too long. But anyway, starting off, we do have Diluc here. Now, Diluc's problem is that there are just so many strong pyro DPS right now in the game. You have Mavuika, Arlecchino, Linny, as well as Hu Tao. With how many and how strong those pyro DPS are, I recommend you pull for at least one of them. You technically can play them in plunge, but then you can also do the same for Garming. You can do the same for Xiao, and then I believe Varessa will end up being a plunge DPS as well. So although I considered putting Diluc in the C tier briefly, I think I'm just going to put him in the D tier anyway. Keqing, slightly easier to place, although her aggravate teams were decent at the beginning. I feel like there's just much better options in the game right now, and that with units like Clarand and then also Varessa being an electro DPS, I feel like her value has just gone down a bit, so I am also going to be putting her in the D tier. I also don't think other teams are as strong as Diluc, and Klee as well, D tier, very clunky unit. Same issue with Diluc, where so many good pyro DPS, I'd sooner play Diluc than I would Klee, and Diluc is a standard character, so yeah. Anyway, moving on, we have Child, a pretty decent character for speedrunning. He was top of the meta for a very long time, although I feel like Hydro is also a very inflated element when it comes to the units that are in it. His team building is relatively restrictive, although I do feel like nowadays he isn't just international, but because we have so many new units, I feel like a lot of people just rather play another Hydro DPS. So I am actually going to put a Child in the C tier. We can have him like top of the C tier, probably. Ganyu is interesting. Ganyu, I mean, here's the thing, we are ranking these characters as DPS. I know some people say, I mean, you can try run a dual DPS, Ganyu. I know with Mizuki's release, you can play like Mizuki, Ayaka, sorry, not Ayaka, Ayato and Ganyu. I actually really like Ayato and Ganyu teams. I pulled both of those units because I thought I'd play them a lot together and then maybe like grab Venti, but then Venti isn't doing too hot right now, so yeah, I think I am just going to put Ganyu in the C tier. She definitely can be used, but I feel like there's much better options for melt, whether it's, I mean, pyro DPS are very good at melting, and then even someone like Ryze I would take over Ganyu, so I will be putting Ganyu in the C tier. Now, Zhao is an interesting one. Zhao, like I said kind of in the intro, he is the main example of having a really, really expensive team. His best installed team of C6 Farazan, Farina, and Shenyan is very strong. It's a top 3 AoE DPS team in the game. He's a very unique unit in that he is quite AoE centric, which isn't like most units in the game. In his full team, maybe he'd just about be in the bottom of the A tier, but because there are so many strong A tier characters, and I don't want to maybe I don't want to consider a C6 Farazan, maybe something like a C2, because I do want this to be slightly more relatable. Then I do think I will be putting Xiao in the B tier. Hu Tao is a character who last time I put in the A tier. When it comes to what other units we have had in version 5, I mean, obviously you could say Mavuika has put her value down a bit. At the same time, we did get Sitlali, so I feel like a Melt Hu Tao is more viable now than it ever was. And you could also still just play Sitlali with like Farina Yelan, Xingqiu Yelan. Will have more offensive capabilities than someone like Zhongli. So I feel like for the time being, I will still put Hu Tao in the A tier, although we will have to see how that goes as the tier list goes along. This isn't 100% set in stone yet. I might still move characters around a bit. Eula physical, not in a good spot, clunky to play, stuff like that, so yeah, I'm not gonna rate her the highest. Ayaka's interesting. See, technically what we could do is we could put Ganyu down in D, Ayaka in C, and then Risley in B. I would probably rate Risley the highest of the two because he's good in both melt and freeze, whereas I feel like Ayaka is more freeze-centric and then Ganyu is more melt-centric. I mean, she can still do pretty good damage. The thing is, for example, even in a Farina team where a boss can't be frozen, if you play like Farina, Shenhe, and someone like Shenyun or Jean, it's actually still a pretty decent team. Technically, you could just slot in like a Mavika there just to front load a little bit of damage as well, or you could go something like Farina, Mika, and Kazuha in AoE. I feel like she still definitely has some potential. I don't know. Maybe I'll be generous and put her at the bottom of the B tier for the time being. Although, like I said, these two might still go down. I'm not 100% sure yet. Yoimiya, I mean, we already have 2 Pyro DPS here, so maybe I might as well just put her like near the bottom of the C tier. I mean, when it comes to what upgrades she got, you know, she can't plunge like Diluc, although Citlali will probably be an upgrade over Zhongli in her teams. I mean, I don't do much research on Yoimiya. I don't have her on either of my accounts. I have these 7 on my accounts. These 3 on the right, I don't have on any of them, but there is a reason for that. So yeah, I feel like, I mean, she can be nice for bosses which fly around a lot and stuff like that. So I'll let Yoimiya be in the C tier. Raiden. Okay, here's the interesting thing. Raiden as a unit, I would rank minimum B tier, maybe even A tier. Although Raiden as a, and you know, this is including sub DPS and Hyper Bloom Raiden, and also just as an elemental reactor. But as purely as a DPS, I'd say Raiden's probably a C tier unit. Don't think her numbers are the strongest. I mean, obviously, if you have C2, she's decent, but even then, I feel like there are other characters at C0 who beat her DPS at C2 nowadays. You know, back in the day, she was insane, but nowadays, less so, I would probably say. Ito, not even the best Geo DPS in the game nowadays. I don't know how Shallonen DPS stacks up against Ito DPS, but yeah, he's also a character who hasn't gotten too many upgrades, so I will probably just be keeping him in the C tier. Okay, Aito, this might be the first hot take. A lot of people would say Aito is one of the worst DPS in the game. I actually think, first of all, Aito is one of the most versatile DPS in the game. Second of all, he's one of the easiest DPS in the game. And third of all, I think he keeps getting a lot of new teams. I mean, first of all, in version 3, we got Hyper Bloom Aito with Nahida, Beidou, and Cookie, which you only needed Nahida for, which a lot of people pulled for, so that was a pretty accessible team. I mean, obviously, you know, when he first released, he had, like, melt teams with Shangling and stuff like that. Then in version 4, we got Farina, which enabled him to play Marchese on some mono Hydro teams, which is very fun. Like, I love using a team of Farina, Yelan, and nowadays you can use one of Shallonen, or you can also use Kaza if it's more AoE, and if there's no Hydro resistance, that team is actually pretty damn good. And now, with Citlali and Mavika, what you can technically do is you can run a team of, once again, Aito on Marchese, Farina on Golden Troop, Mavika on Obsidian, and then for your last slot, Shallonen is probably my favorite because I feel like her buffs last pretty well. Obviously, they're pretty strong. They will buff both Mavika and Aito's DPS. And also give you healing for Farina stacks. So there's just so much synergy in that team. You could also technically run Citlali because she does reduce Pyro and Hydro res. But yeah, that team is very strong. It's one of my favorite dual DPS teams in the entire game. I'm actually going to put Aito in the B tier. I might even say Aito could be better than Ayaka just because of how much Cryo is struggling at the moment. So yeah, that might be a hot take, but I love Aito. I use him in pretty much every single Abyss, and I have no regrets about it. Also, if you get the event sword, which gives you credit for having a shielded character, that's also a really good F2P weapon if you play him with someone like Citlali. I don't know if that counts towards crystallized shields, but if it does, then that's something which is pretty insane. Tignari, probably the best standard DPS character, especially if you get constellations. I mean, we can consider maybe like early constellations for standard characters. Limited ones are only C0R0, but maybe we could consider like a C2R0 Slingshot Tignari, which maybe you could put in the B tier, but I do feel like because he is very single target, I'd still probably put him in the C tier, somewhere around here. You know, he can have some okay dual carry teams. I don't know how good a Burning Tignari with Emily would be. Just something I thought of right now on the spot. Like I said, not sure how well that would go, but, you know, it's definitely a possibility. Sino, I would probably put in the D tier as well. Once again, teams are clunky, team synergies aren't the best. I believe one of his best teams is Baiju, Farina plus second Electro, but that doesn't even sound like the greatest. Maybe you can slot Shallonen in there, I don't know. Yeah, Sino isn't very meta relevant, so I would put him in the D tier. Nilo is an interesting character. This is another character I don't own. I know she's also similar to Zhao, where she is very good in AoE, because her super blooms are just quite good in AoE. Her teams are both flexible yet restrictive, because it has to be Hydro and Dendro. So it is flexible in that you can choose a lot of different Hydro and Dendro units. Yeah, it's just weird. I feel like I'm gonna put her in the B tier as well alongside Zhao. In the past, I probably would put her in the A tier, but now that we have so many good DPS characters, I'd probably put her in the B tier. Wanderer, Animo DPS, I don't think he's as good as Zhao. I also don't think he has a niche like Zhao. Like I said, Zhao's niche is AoE, whereas, he just has better AoE than Wanderer. And then there's so many better units than Wanderer, I think, when it comes to just doing pure damage, whether it's, like mixed target or single target. So I am actually just going to put him in the C tier. He can go next to his mother. How about that? We can do something like this. This can be cute. They can have a little family reunion. Al-Haytham, in my last tier list before Natlan came out, I did have Al-Haytham as a S tier unit. I do feel like he has gone down slightly. I feel like a lot less people are talking about him now. He's kind of becoming an Aito character, I feel like, slowly, where people are just talking less and less about him, although I don't think he's doing that bad. I don't think his best in slot team has really changed in Natlan. I do still feel like you will be playing Farina and then one of Baiju or Nahida and then Cookie. I think that's a really fun quick bloom team. Or you can do something like Yai and what's her name? Yai and Fischl, or maybe like even an Aurora nowadays. That could be cool as well. Especially with the hero set, and then just throw in a second Dendro. So yeah, I'm gonna keep Al-Haytham in the A tier. He has a bit of team versatility. He's good in both mixed target situations and single target. So yeah, I will be putting him in the A tier. Linny, okay, this is interesting. When I was doing, because I did a tier list pre-Natlan. Then I did a ranking of the top 20 units. When Watch Mojo did that video and there was a lot of outcry, I gave my own take on it. I ended up putting Hu Tao above Linny, not many spots, but then I swear the almost half the comments were about Linny being better than Hu Tao. I actually think they're quite similar to each other. The problem is I don't own Linny on either account, so I don't really keep up with how his teams have changed. I know you want normally like 3 power units on there. I don't know if Mavika's a big upgrade. Maybe Linny's new best team is Linny, Bennett, Mavika, Sitlali. That's something which I could see happening. I'm gonna keep Linny and Hu Tao tied together. I feel like if you learn how to play both of them properly, then they can be better than the other. I do feel like they both have quite a lot of potential. So yeah, I am just gonna shoehorn them together kind of. What I technically could do is, because Arlecchino and Mavika are both so strong, and I recommend putting at least one of them, if not both of them, then maybe even something like this, and then maybe like this, or just keep him down here. I feel like that's a possibility, but I don't want to do that just yet. I feel like these guys are still relevant enough. They're still very strong in Abyss, so I don't want to put them below the A tier right now. So yeah, anyway, also Neuvillette, easy S tier. Very easy to play, very accessible, very strong, many different teams. You have the traditional Farina teams. If you don't have Farina, you can play him with Mavika double carry teams, kind of similar to Ayato. He just has so many teams, such good DPS, so easy to play. Alongside Zhao, best AoE DPS, I'd say. I mean, your top 3 characters in AoE, if you ask me, are Neuvillette, Mavika, and Zhao in whatever order you want to place them. So yeah, easy S tier. I don't think anyone should argue about that. And if you are, then I feel like you have a few problems going on. Wriothesley, I mean, if you want to say he's boring, sure, maybe, but he is just an S tier unit. Anyway, Wriothesley. Now, Wriothesley is the only ever character I have intentionally pulled a constellation for. Because I saved a very long time, because as soon as I saw him announced in the Fontaine trailer, I was like, oh my god, I need him, so I saved up a lot of pulls to get his C1. which means, I mean, I did test, I do have a showcase of C0 versus C1 but that is back in the version 4.1 Abyss, which was a while ago, and Abyss has changed a little bit. Back then, it didn't feel too bad to play. I don't know how it feels now. I feel like it's more important maybe in melt teams, although Ryze also has gotten a lot of cool new units you can play with him. You can play the Bennett Changling, and then you can play Shenhe, you can play Nahida for Burn Melt, you can play as well Shalonen nowadays. And then what else is there? Oh yeah, Movika double carry teams you can play as well. So yeah, Ryze I would definitely put in the B tier, you know, something like this. I would put him above Icar. I do feel like he is more flexible and has gotten more useful teammates. So I do think Ryze, even at C0, can be B tier. C1, maybe even up here. But for the time being, I will put him in the B tier. Navia, strongest Geo DPS in the game, some of the bigger... I mean, it's really nice that a lot of her damage is tied to her skill, so I will be putting her in the A tier. Very strong. I mean, one problem maybe is that there aren't the best free-to-play options for Claymores, but technically you can just get Blackcliff, so yeah, I do feel like Navia in the A tier is pretty decent. Especially if you have any Geo damage, she is probably your best bet, although you could technically just get it from playing like a dual Geo DPS core of like Chiori Zhongli, Chiori Shalonen Zhongli does also do pretty well, but yeah, that's besides the point. Arlecchino, the only character I've ever gotten a double of, so I did accidentally get a C1 Arlecchino, but even a C0 Arlecchino I would put in the S tier. I mean, okay, you know what, let's just place Movika in the S tier right now already. I feel like, I don't think there's a tier gap between these lot, although there's maybe like a half tier gap. Although I don't think it's enough of a tier gap to put Arlecchino in the A tier. I do still feel like these are your big three in the game right now. And I mean, just to talk quickly about Movika, this isn't even considering her supportive capabilities, although those definitely exist as but you know, if you play her as either not even sub DPS, but if you just play her as a dual carry with characters like Ayato or Ryze, which I think you can consider dual carries, then I feel like she, you know, as well as just her main DPS teams, you might say that having to play Natlan characters with her can be a bit restrictive, although maybe Janssen will alleviate those. But yeah, I mean, you can play her Melt, you can play her Overload as well with Chevreuse, and then like an Auroron, and then from an like official or a Bennett. Very, very fun. So yeah, easy S tier. Her hyper carry teams do absolutely nutty damage. Clarand, best Electro DPS in the game, I would say. Maybe at the... Before Natlan, I'd have put her like right at the end of the A tier. Although now, after Movika's release, the Clarand Movika double DPS overload team with like Chevreuse and Auroron is... And maybe Janssen could also be a decent addition there. We will have to wait and see. Is so fun, so good, surprisingly strong in AoE. When you think Overload, you normally don't think AoE, but it just does so much damage in like a decent area that it's actually pretty damn decent. In single target, of course, it absolutely destroys as well. So I will be putting it in the A tier. I feel like Clarand has just kept getting better and better with time. You know, Shalonen was a nice buff at the beginning, and then with Movika as well, just very, very fun times. Mualani is one of... I'm not gonna lie, when I first got her, I really enjoyed playing her, but then Movika released, and her numbers are just so nutty that I'm like, you know... And she's also so much easier and more versatile to play than Mualani, I think. I'm not a Mualani hater, I loved her at the beginning. I do still feel like she is fun, but I barely ever use her. I use Ayato more than I use Mualani. Now, I don't think Ayato is better than Mualani, but I do prefer using Ayato to Mualani. I will still be putting her above Ayato, but I don't think she cracks into the A tier just for me, because I mean, Neuvillette is so strong, and then once again, there's just so much Hydro competition. This might be a hot take. I feel like maybe she belongs to be up here, but with some of her gameplay issues, I just rather putting her at B tier. I'm gonna be completely honest. I'm sorry, Mualani mains. This pains me as much as it pains you. Kanich, similar to a Hu Tao Linny situation, I would kind of join him up with Alhaitham. I do feel like he is also... Look how pale Alhaitham is. I'm only realizing. I mean, these 4 units are very pale. I am... you know, I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole right now, though. But yeah, Kanich, more single target than Alhaitham, definitely. Although, not even by much. I mean, he's still okay in more than one target. It can just be a bit more annoying. I mean, I don't own him, but, you know, his teams are pretty decent as well. Movika isn't as good of a support for him as we would have expected. Same thing for Mualani. I feel like Mualani's teams just aren't perfect. Like, if I want to run Farina with her, then I'm probably going to need Changling instead of Mavrika. If I do want to run Mavrika, I don't know. I just feel like Mualani's teams end up being a bit weird. I feel like there's no one perfect team. Unless maybe you have like an Emily team. Maybe Emily teams with Mualani are like the perfect ones. But because I don't have her, then I would not know. So, yeah, that's part of my reasoning. But yeah. Kanich, pretty solid. Bennett will often be at the hip with him, and then probably one of Nahida or Emily, and then like a Pyro Traveler or a Mavrika. So, yeah, I would put him in a similar tier to Al-Haytham. Chaska's interesting. I do think Chaska is better than Wanderer. She might even be stronger than Zhao. But the problem is she doesn't have a niche like Zhao does. Again, Zhao does very well in that AoE niche. That I feel like I'm going to pair her up similar to Mualani. I do feel like their performances sometimes end up being a bit similar. Mualani is probably slightly stronger than Chaska. I actually, I pulled both Mualani and Chaska, and I just find myself rarely using them, to be honest. I use Ayato and Hu Tao and Clarand more often than I use those two. And I mean, most of the time I'm using Nivlet Mavrika, but when I'm not, it's normally one of Clarand or Ayato or Hu Tao rounding out my teams. I feel like it's rarely these two. Although, I mean, with some of the Natlan bosses, they can be quite useful because Natlan bosses can be incredibly annoying. But yeah, I feel like they both probably belong in the B tier. And then that brings us on to our newest DPS, Mizuki. Could technically go in the D tier, but then she does again fill up that AoE niche, which is cool. She makes your supports thrive. What I think is gonna save her from putting her in the D tier is if your Mavrika is free, then you can actually play a team of like Farina, Mavrika +1, maybe like an Auroron to get the hero set, and it actually works pretty damn well. And also, if you get her from Standard Banner or the Selector, I mean, I pulled her on her banner, which might be a bit silly, but I decided, you know what, I'd rather get her sooner rather than later in case I ever want to play her, and then also I can get her constellations quicker, which is why I ended up pulling her. Also, I don't plan on pulling many units on my other account, so yeah, that's why, and I had some pulls to spare, which is why I decided to get her. I mean, if I lost my 50-50, then I was just going to save my guarantee, but if we got her, I wasn't going to complain, and you know what? She hasn't been a perfect unit, but she's been good enough for me, so I feel like C tier is fine, especially in those teams with Mavrika. Without Mavrika, if you play her in like Farina or Auroron Fischl, then, if things go well for you, then she can do well, but if not, then maybe she goes down here. But I feel like I want to give her the benefit of the doubt, especially if we see how strong her C2 is, then, we can probably keep her in the C tier. She's not going to go higher than the C tier unless we get some insane off-field supports. But I think for the time being, she can go in the C tier. But yeah, looking at this tier list, what should you do? I definitely recommend picking up a Novelet and also a Farina just to pair with, because Farina's really good for her accounts. Mavrika as well. Novelet, Mavrika are probably the two units you want to play. And then you might think because you have Mavrika, you don't want to get Arlecchino. Although I actually don't think getting Arlecchino and Mavrika on the same account is that bad, because they both have like Arlecchino has more diverse teams than Mavrika, which actually allows you to play two different teams. For example, one of them can play Melt. You can play like Mavrika Melt, or in her hypercarry teams with like Setlali Kaya, or just Setlali Bennett Shalonen. And then for Arlecchino, you can run a Vape team and then maybe finish it off with someone like a Kazuha, which is pretty fun, or maybe even a Lanyan if you want more sustain. Or you could play one of them as Overload. Either one would work just fine, and then play the other one in a Melt team. So I feel like it is actually decent to go for both of these. Or what you can do is you can use Arlecchino as your Pyro DPS, and then use Mavrika in dual carry or as a kind of as a sub DPS, so that you can front load more damage in your Clarand, Risley, Ayato teams. You can even run Mavrika with Novelet, kind of as I mentioned, and then use Arlecchino on your other half. If you have these three, your account is basically set. And then I would recommend maybe going for one of these Dendro DPS. Navia can be a decent pickup, but not required. Clarand, pretty solid. Now, this tier list is obviously before Varessa releases. Varessa releases in like 2 weeks. I feel like she should be about this tier, I feel like. This is going off not being 100% sure of what her gameplay really is. I'm pretty sure she does plunges, but other than that, I'm not sure, and I don't know how good her scalings are. She probably won't be lower than a B tier. I feel like if you want an Electro DPS, but you don't want to pull Clarand, then you could go for Varessa. I feel like that's how it will end up shaping out. but make sure you go watch reviews of her because I'm not in a position to know. And then, you know, once you get one of these, if you get both of these, I don't feel like you need any of these. If you only get one of these, you can pick up one of these if you want. Probably not Arlecchino, but if you pick up Movika, then if you don't like Arlecchino, but you like either Hu Tao or Lini, you can pick one of them up, that's fine. Zhao, if you want to pick up Shenyun, would also be a good pull. Nilo, if you want to pick up some of her teammates, would be a good pull. Mualani, Chaska, if you enjoy their gameplay, they're decent. If you want a cryo DPS, I would recommend picking up one of these, although with Skirk maybe becoming playable. Maybe wait off on it if you really care. Ayato, I don't think he's a very meta pull, but if you like him as a character, you shouldn't feel ashamed of pulling for him. I feel like it's fine to do. Novlet and Mualani are probably the better pulls, but I personally prefer Ayato, which is why he is in the B tier for me. So I'd say anyone from S to B will either be very good, or solid picks if you want to invest in them. C tier, I'd say, are the less recommendable ones. You know, I wouldn't intentionally pull for these two, but you can pull them, or you can build them, and they're probably your best bets to go for from the standard selector. If you have all the other characters, you know, you can build up the constellations, and they probably have some of the best constellations. Wanderer, if you like his character, you can go for him. Raiden, like I said, more of a value comes from her as a unit rather than her as a DPS. I wouldn't recommend her as a DPS. I would go for one of Clorad, maybe even Varessa. Or you could, but if you want to pull her as a unit for like Hyper Boom stuff, although Cookie's there, so she's not necessary, you could pull her for some sub DPS stuff and then sometimes use her as a DPS. So I don't think she's the worst pull. Ito, I would just recommend Navia, although if you really, really like him, then I'm not going to stop you. Ganyu, same thing. I recommend one of these two, but if you really like her, I'm not going to stop you. Child, one of these 3, but if you really like her, I'm not going to stop you. Yoimiya, one of these 4, but if you like her, I'm not going to stop you. And then, I mean, you two are standard characters, so, you know, if you get them and you don't want to pull any of a Pyro DPS or Electro DPS, then sure, you can use them to fill gaps. I don't think Electro DPS are that necessary, though, because there are so many good Electro off-fielders, like Fischl and Auroron, so, yeah, and then Sino, Eula, and Klee, I can't really recommend pulling, but again, if you really like him, Genshin's an easy game. It's not like Star Rail where, you know, it's more the characters you pull matter quite a lot. I feel like you can get away with basically pulling whoever you want. Like I said, S to B are what I'd consider the meta to somewhat meta, and then C and D I wouldn't really call meta, but again, if you enjoy them, you can still probably use them, you can still probably clear with them. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think down below. What would you do with Hu Tao Lini? Would you place one in A tier? Would you place one in B tier? Would you place them both in A tier? Would you place them both in B tier? What do you think of Mualani's placement? How based is my Ayato take? If it's anything other than Giga based, I don't want to hear it. What do you think we should do with the cryo DPS? I feel like those are some of the biggest questions here, but other than that, I'd say this is pretty solid. Maybe some of these characters you can shift around a little bit like that, but yeah, this is my personal tier list. Let me know what yours would be. Try to keep it respectful and fun down below, but yeah, with that being said, see ya.